So, do we have any apologies this morning? I'm not aware of any. I think we have most people either in the room or online. Do we have any declarations of interest this morning? I'm not aware of any. Public forums, petitions, deputations. I'm not aware of any this morning. So we'll move to the confirmation of minutes from the ordinary meeting of the 30th of June. Would somebody like to move that they are a true and correct record? Moved by Linda. Any corrections or alterations? If not, I will put the recommendation. All in favour will say aye. Aye. That's no carry. Right, we'll now move to the adoption of community various resolutions. First up is the strategy and policy meeting. Eric, would you like to comment on your meeting?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm fine with the notes, but I'll just answer questions of this stage.
Any questions for Eric on the strategy and policy meeting that was held on the 22nd of July?
One of the things we did, Mr. Chairman, was to put out without prejudice sort of interim progress report of where we were with the climate change stuff, and just to let people know of the work program and where we were getting at. And that's ongoing work, but it just gave councillors an insight into the progress so far. We've been a bit interrupted by COVID, but we're back on track. We'll probably end up about a month behind our schedule to get the thing completed.
Thank you, Eric. And it was actually quite timely because we've had government announcements in the last week too. If there's no further questions for Eric, I'm assuming you will move the recommendation. Yes. Seconded by David. No further discussion. I will put the motion. All in favour will say aye. Aye. Against no. Now move to the minutes of the organisational performance in Audit Committee of the 22nd. Linda, would you make like a comment on it?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to bring people's attention to item 4, which was the monthly plan update. Just highlighting the fact that the advice from the COVID-19 local government response unit is that long-term plans should have a recovery focus, and there's a bullet point list of things that should be taken into account. So if anybody needs any refresher on that, they should look at item 4. That I will move the recommendation.
Moved by Lyndall, seconded by Lloyd. Any further discussion or questions? If not, I will put the recommendation. All in favour will say aye. Aye. Against no. Right, we'll move to item 7, notification of ordinary or urgent business, supplementary reports or other. I'm not aware of any this morning. We'll move to item 8. I haven't been made aware of any questions this morning. We'll move to item 9. My schedule has been in the minutes. I'm quite happy to answer any questions on that. Had a week away on leave last week. It's actually quite good. We would have looked at the North Island and just never know to reflect. Come back to South and we're looking pretty good actually when you look around. Do we have any, there's no questions on my activities, do we have any verbal reports this morning? Lloyd.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I attended the Southern Pest Eradication Society AGM, and it was very well attended. The room was full with farmers all over the southern region, and some quite impressive tallies of animals that have been shot over the last 12 months, and I was surprised at the amount of possum they picked up down here as well. So a good conversation. They're asking from myself some questions. We'll follow that up. I'd go myself to follow that through, but yeah, it was I attended on a sort of a rough night, really. And the only thing I would say is I was there to represent council, but the staff didn't put an apology. I know they did contact the staff and we are involved there, and it's really good if we have staff representation on the road.
Thank you for that, Lloyd. Any further verbal reports this morning? I've got Eric.
I had a question for Lloyd about the funding. That's funded on a per hectare rate or something.
It's a unique situation. They ask us to help them rate themselves to carry out a dominant rate project through the region, and they do ewes and possums at the same time. So it's a totally separate system in which we help them through that accounting process.
It's been around before I was on council, and I think it's almost a forerunner of the possum control areas that we have been forming over recent years. That they've always been very efficient and very frugal. The rates have stayed pretty static. I think there might be some small rise this year, but it's a good example of a community group working together. Now I have Eric.
Yeah, well, Mr. Chairman, I was in the report that yourself, me and Ian McDonald and a number of ES staff attended the workshop for 3 Waters. It was quite well attended by a significant number of the local territorial authority, both councillors and staff. It was held in Civic last week or the week before. It was very much a preliminary stage and a lot of workshop and sounding out of ideas. I think the message that we got clearly from those who were conducting the seminar was that the government is serious. It's indicated 750 million nationwide to start and correct and do some of the work that's necessary. And a lot of looking at successful modelling overseas was something that was discussed, but it was, as I say, at the preliminary stage, a lot of workshops, a lot of ideas, and I think it's something we need to stay engaged with going forward.
No, thank you for that, Eric. And this is the beginning of what I believe will be a substantial change in the way local government operates, because the government's view is that economies of scale are needed, and the path which I'm fairly confident they will do will have quite large entities that will eventually look after not only drinking water, which is the first cab off the rank, but also wastewater, and I think eventually stormwater. And this will have significant implications, I guess, for some of the smaller councils, because it will take a great deal of work out away from them. We have to watch how this actually moves forward. The first 3 tranches, the first one, you qualify for money to do works, and there's no commitment. The next tranche that I think will be quite a pressure going forward for communities to work together. Otago and Southland are having conversations to see whether that size will be a vehicle that will get approved going forward. But watch the space. It is going to be quite interesting to see where this goes. Peter.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'd just like to back that up. What Eric said, one of the key figures that was said right at the start of that workshop is 20% of TAs throughout the entire country are not entering into reconsenting processes for the very reason that they can't afford it. So the government's realised out of necessity that they have to grab control of this. So it's born out of a failure of the current system the way it is. But it was a really good insight into the future and what it's going to look like.
That'll be interesting, because at the end of the day, the same people will pay for those charges. See efficiencies in larger areas, I guess almost large urban areas, in the sense subsidising the lighter population areas, which is something that doesn't find favour with the urban areas, but we'll have to watch where this goes. There are a couple of models around the world, the Irish model and the Tasmanian model seem to be, and the Scottish one seem to be some of the ones that they are looking at. But I think after the election, we'll see this move around the position.
And what hit home to me is I constantly, being out in the rural areas, farmers talk to me about the urban water quality, and what hit home to me at that workshop was how advanced the rural areas are around their infrastructure.
Peter, David.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I attended a Bridgend with Farming seminar workshop toward the end of July, and that was very interesting. Lots of different practices. There was no sort of system that fits all. But really what I took out of it was it will actually be a reasonable amount of that now ourselves. And really it's just a matter of in some certain, I suppose, areas of farming you could actually change quite easily. But no, there seems to be quite a variety of practices in place and interpretations of the gender farming. And that was very interesting.
David, any further? You want to add anything?
I was just saying, just on that note, that whether it's been covered or not, we also attended one with Eric Lindell and Jeremy and myself. I think it was on the 24th of July, was it? And at the Carver Park. So very good sort of low level insight into farming practice. So good to see.
Right, if there are no further reports, we'll move to item 10. And the first item up is the Chief Executive Report. And I'll ask to comment on his comprehensive report.
Thank you, Chair. Just from a national perspective, I guess we touched on the three orders, and so coming out of Wellington is a significant focus on water, with the three orders looking at how do we manage wastewater and drinking water. The formation of the new regulator, which is CCNC Bill Bayfield heading up. He's establishing a new organisation, putting in place so they have a significant role going forward, but it is connected to the three orders initiatives which you described. And so this will have some implications for regional councils too, in terms of focus on drinking water. We'll need to be looking at ensuring the source water is protected and managed appropriately, putting more emphasis on that perhaps than in the past. So we're getting some advice around what does that mean for us going forward. But also the freshwater package came out last week, and again, so reinforces this council's direction of travel. The bars being raised is putting Tomato wide at the centre. And we'll also be looking at what does that mean for councils and for the community going forward. Our plans are still very relevant, and what we need to be doing with the regional forum and the city limits, that's very much required. Part of the initiatives is also around the RMA process, which means we don't have to go through the environmental process, provided we follow the regional forum process, get that process of buy-in. So that's welcome. Yeah, I'll just leave it there. Yeah, there's an awful lot going on in the organisation. Summary going through there, what's happening across the place. We were operating as pretty much normal yesterday. We're now moving to actually what is now level 2, and we'll see what the end of the week brings us. So we're actively looking at continuing to operate as a business, of course. That we need to be adjusting, and we've been through this lockdown before. We can certainly do it again, but we'll see what Friday brings us. Any questions?
Hello.
You just spoke in your report, Rob, about the removal of the N impact catchment schedule. Are you able to elaborate a little bit more on that? Because obviously that was one area that we were quite worried about in the south, that most of our rivers have been targeted on that schedule. So have they taken it out completely, or is it more being parked to one side temporarily?
No, look, I think, and then will also help me out here, but look, I think pretty clear through the rest of the package what we need to be doing. I don't think that was essentially needed. They've taken out the requirement around DIN, they parked that for 12 months. That's something there's been some discussion and controversy about. So the DIN requirements in park or Snyder's do some corpusing and coming out with actually what should the advice be for DINs. The ineffective catchments, my understanding is about clarity around what's required to meet the requirements. We don't need to.
So it's not possibly that it'll be re-evaluated in 12 months after DIN has been evaluated.
I can't predict the future on that one, but I'm not sure where that will land in terms of that. Probably won't have a big impact on it. DIN is more around the soft bottom streams, from my understanding. So it's more an issue for some of the North Island Council, where the soft bottom streams, where the challenge there was if you met the DIN, you wouldn't actually necessarily improve the quality. So that's the conversation going on. It's not going to, my understanding, not going to really affect us. Our rivers and water bodies, should be bottom, so they're not. But is there anything that you want to add to that?
Lloyd, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you, following up the basic comments of media recently about to the sea concept that estuary should be included. Do you have any comment on that? Because I think, being how that fits in, it could drive some unprecedented behaviours, and I don't know whether it's helpful or not helpful, because they're in the code anyway, sits right on the estuary, and there's been other activity in the estuary over a number of years, and it's a highly modified estuary. So even if we produce perfect water into the estuary, we may still fail. So I'm just wondering whether those comments from him.
So a couple of things. First of all, the PCE's role is advisory. He provides advice, doesn't have any decision-making responsibility. So with the estuaries under our plans going forward, we include estuaries anyway. So they're part of our package, and how we're managing our waterways include the impact on estuaries. So we're probably already aware the Parliamentary Commissioner's recommendation is that what's missing, as he says, is that national view on that. Then is that fair? Lynn's agreeing a lot to that now.
Well, again, just on this, the meeting of the regional sector, it's become apparent over the last few months that government's respect for the sector around the ability to work in partnership has come into focus. So the group now, Kahui, Maori, MPI, MFE, and the regional sector are going to work together on some of the implementation, which I think is a positive step forward, because hopefully reps can bring in some of that regional flavour. We all want the same results, but often a straight blunt rule is difficult to implement across the country. So that over the last 3 years, I think has been a wee bit of an improvement, and I guess it's been the responsible way the sector have actually worked with government to actually get good results. Further questions for Rob? Moved by Lloyd, seconded by Jeremy. All in favour, say aye. Aye. So carried. Right, we'll move to item 2, which is changes to the delegations related to proposed water and planning for the non-plan field. Alex, would you like to speak?
Yes, I would. I should take the item as read in the first instance, but perhaps go into the context around what we're asking for and why we're here. So you'll be well aware that water and land plan appeals process marches on. It's been a reasonably slow-going process to date, but with the hope that we will now be shifting into a basic mediation that is likely to speed of some of the appeal points. The most recent update on the appeals is that a combined memorandum to the court on behalf of all of the parties was lodged, which put forward a position that had been agreed on by all of the parties and experts to resolve the outstanding components of the topic A appeals, so the higher order components of the plan, the objectives, and some of the policies. That's with the court, and we are awaiting the direction from the court as to whether or not they are prepared to accept that agreed position. So, pending what comes out of the court at that stage, we may well see the end of the topic A appeals, and we'll be in a position to move forward onto topic B. The court has signalled already that as we move into topic B, which will be a bit more of the details, some of the rules and the outstanding policies in the plan, that we will be looking towards ultimate dispute resolution processes. That includes things like mediation. In order to effectively mediate on the plan and with the other parties, staff need the appropriate delegations. That is a requirement of the Environment Court Code of Practice Note, which says that anyone participating in mediation needs to have the authority to sign off on the delegated authority to sign off on mediated points. I suppose the complication arises from the fact that the interim decision we've seen from the court and the direction of travel has now shifted quite significantly from the notified versions of the plan or the adopted versions of the plan. And in order for staff to effectively participate in that mediation and expedite the resolution of appeals, we're seeking a broadening of scope of the delegations to encompass, in the first instance, the area between the initial the bespoke delegations there outline that scope, which is between the council's decision version on the plan and the judge's interim decision. The other thing that we are seeking relates to the release of the suite of national government direction in relation to fresh water, the new NPS, the new NES, and the Section 360 regulations. Where possible, we're looking to create alignment with that plan with those new documents, which we'll have to look at as a matter of course anyway through the appeals process rather than separate processes. The last thing I'd like to mention is the role of council in continuing to support staff as they move through mediation. So the delegations sought are not intended to be a carte blanche for staff to merrily go away and mediate without council input. You may recall at a Sturgeon policy meeting back on 5th of February, we re-established the appeals subcommittee. Some membership is represented in this room, I think. The intent moving forward is to continue to touch in with that committee in relation to the scope of delegations, so that staff have the appropriate steer from council to allow for the resolution of appeal points. So we would be, we have not brought that subcommittee forward yet because we're not in the mediating stage, but we would intend to be leaning quite heavily on that committee, probably sometimes at quite short notice, to make sure that staff are on the right track with the mediated outcomes that we're seeking. The final important thing to note about that is that neither the appeals subcommittee nor staff will have the authority to decide on mediation points outside the scope of the delegations we're seeking now. So any changes we still need to return beyond that scope, we still need to return back to full council. So at that point, I would take questions.
Thank you for that, Alex. That's good to hear that this appeals subcommittee will have an active role. And could I suggest this back in the avoid of post-COVID, but it would probably be good to meet sooner rather than later and just give that subcommittee a bit of a feel for where topic A has landed. I think that would be a good start, and having those ongoing discussions as topic B will be really good. Eric.
Yeah, just a point of clarification here. We I think appointed 4 people onto that committee. But I don't know that we've created a chair or an organiser or whatever you want to call that to convene meetings and do what's got to be done in relation to that. All we did was just, if my memory's correct, just put 4 people on there. And I think we need a lead on that committee to, just do what has to be done to initiate stuff.
Well, I think normally that would sit under the policy and strategy, committees.
Well, that's where the, yes.
I'm happy to nominate you.
I'm not seeking control, I just don't want a hole where we, we just need to have a formalise what's going to happen so we know.
For each, we can establish an initial meeting with that committee to work out some of the details.
Right.
I believe there's a terms of reference for that committee
Okay.
also. So if we need to formalise a committee leader, we can seek to do that in the first meeting of the committee.
Right. Yeah. Okay. It was just a point of clarification.
But David and Peter,
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I was just in regards to more contentious practices within the map plan, some of that's been pretty much taken out of our hands. And obviously from to do with slope and wintering and those sort of things. So really, the lady part of the discussion really is that pretty much sidelined now.
So through you, Chair, we have also only just seen the actual content of these proposals recently. The process internally that we are undertaking now is an assessment of those proposals against a whole host of other things. So that includes the appeals process, the work we've got underway as part of the program, the old water plan, or the existing water plan, I should say, all of which are likely to need some degree of tweaking and manipulation in response to those components. I think we are likely to see some things come off the table because they have been decided for us. That's why part of the delegations we're seeking will allow staff to seek those changes as part of the appeals process where it's feasible to do so. But we are at the early stages of assessing where the overlap might allow for us to do that and where the scope of appeals is within the remit of the things that are under the field to allow us to do that. So yes, there will be changes. Yes, some things will come off the table. To what extent is probably needs a little bit of work to be determined, and something that we'll be working through with the legal advisors as well.
Peter.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Just to clarify with the appeals committee that we will have a discussion around who will convene that panel. I think it's pretty important instead of letting it happen organically. And just the other thing, I'll pick up on some words now, let's move forward. I think it's really important we do. So community feedback that I'm receiving is that we just need to get a baseline to move forward so people can make investment decisions because there's just so many balls in the air. So there's an opportunity to leapfrog, so to speak, forward. We should seriously look at taking that and getting bogged down. It's really important. That's just what the community is telling.
So, through you, Chair, it was very apparent as we moved through the hearings process on the water plan topic-based stuff that was cumbersome and slow and expensive for ourselves, the community, and all of the other elements. Because when we moved into a phase of direct negotiation between the experts and the parties, things picked up at speed and moved quite quickly. So I'm optimistic that continuing down that track with mediation will allow us to knock things on the head a lot more expediently than otherwise, and that will give us the certainty and forward momentum, hopefully, to have things lined up sooner rather than later. It's possible that things will still head back to hearings if there's contention that can't be resolved, but the more we can resolve, the more certainty that we can provide.
I'm not advocating taking a eye all around detail, of course, where there is an opportunity to short circuit into leapfrog, should be looking at that. Thanks, Alex.
Jeremy.
Chair, just in regards, obviously, from a, I probably have a little bit more of a hard line approach in regards to working through this plan, through the court process. And we're just trying to understand what the government's becoming overriding the process from what our community has been involved with. And it may not be the whole council's opinion, but I certainly hope that their legal team defend what the community has put into this plan. Because there is certainly a feeling out there that whatever we do might not be good enough, or the government's just going to override some of these decisions. I know not everyone will agree with it, but it's just from my point of view that I just hope that that doesn't always happen, because it's going to be the community that's going to make this thing work. And every time they look up the goalposts a wee bit more, we won't have input into that. Yes, you can be involved, but now we're taking it away from you. So that's just all I wanted to say. That we've got to defend sometimes what the community wants to.
Just from what I'm hearing on the table, I'll suggest that we have a second recommendation.
Chairman Nicola, could I interrupt? I've got my little blue hand up there.
Oh, sorry. I'll take the last couple, so you've got.
Thank
you. Then I've got Lloyd, then I'll suggest that. Okay, go ahead, Robert.
Thank you. Now, just to respond to a couple of the things that have been said about the need for certainty or bottom lines or benchmarks. Now, I can understand why perhaps the farming community might want that, because they've got skin in the game, and in a conservative part of the world, that would be totally understandable. But when we're talking about environmental issues and the pace at which change is coming at us now, it's not always wise to set a bottom line when the situation is so changeable and fluid that by doing that, you might underplay what's needed, and then people will cling to that for the next decade, and the change that's needed in order to protect the environment won't be able to happen, or will be seriously hindered. So just as a matter of balance, I would like to say that even though I hear the call for that, it's not necessarily correct to ask for it. Thank you.
Robert, Lloyd.
I think you're going to do what I was going to do, Mr. Chairman, so I'll just let you start it, so I'll let you carry on.
Okay, well, having heard the conversation, I just think for clarity that we add a second recommendation, which is the appeals subcommittee will provide guidance to staff in mediation. And I think that's exactly what Alex has said, but I think it may give more comfort to people to actually have that as part of the recommendation. And just commenting on Robert's comments, people do, we need to present a roadmap, and it may well have some guidelines, but if people have got a bit of certainty in the next few years, they can plan. But so not having a bottom line, I don't think is helpful. People will always adapt to certainty much better than uncertainty. At the moment, there's considerable uncertainty out there. And a lot of people that I talk to just want to know what they have to do. And that's not clear at the moment, and that is part of our role is to try and clarify that. Any further comments before we go to those recommendations?
Well, I'm happy to move that, Mr. Chairman. Staff believe that recommendation makes sense, and it actually strengthens and actually reinforces what's in paragraph 12 and paragraph 18. So it's put a little bit more direction in there. So I'm happy to move that, recommendation. So move the two at once.
Move by Lloyd, second by Chairman. Any further discussion on the extended recommendations? If not, I will put those recommendations. All in favour will say aye. Aye. Against, no. Carried. Right, we will move to this item, which is the update on the Southland region. Hearing aids is good, but that's not very good. Southland Regional Agreement position paper for river mouths. So welcome Lucy, and
thank you, Chair.
invite you to speak to the item.
I'm not going to stay sitting given that we're socially distancing, and I think Alex is probably better place to sit up here and answer any questions that you might have. But I just wanted to take 2 seconds and just introduce Nikki Carter. Chapter. She's the newest member of the team, and this is her first paper that she's bringing to council. So this is one of our senior policy planners. So I'm thinking she will talk about it, but kind of going to talk about it more. Thank you.
Welcome, Jimmy.
Good morning. I take it that you read the paper, but I've got some summary points that I'd like to go through for you. So we've prepared a revision of the Southland Region Agreement for positional romance, and we're seeking your approval. In preparing this, we have followed the prescribed RMA process. The agreement is used when we need to determine the coastal marine area landward boundary at river mouths. So this gives us the jurisdiction boundary between coastal plan and water and land plan. The current agreement has got two main issues. The first being that the agreement defines specific river mouths and the positions of the mouth itself using coordinates that is in the old NZ grid system. So this was superseded in 2001, and we now use the NZ transverse system. When we're working with the current agreement, because of the old grid coordinates, we have to do a conversion, and that conversion introduces errors in positioning that result, and those errors can be up to 100 metres out of place. The other issue that we've got in the current agreement is that there are type errors in there. We've got some coordinates that have been duplicated, so a copy and paste type error. We've also got other errors that come from the conversions that put the river mouths on land as opposed to in water. And we've also got errors in the coordinates themselves that resulted in them being way off in the middle of a paddock or a bush somewhere. So we need to address these errors, and we need to update our mapping system. This will allow us to have a better degree of accuracy for people who are using the plans to understand exactly where the river is. So we've reviewed all the river map coordinates that have been specified in the agreement. Most of these are only small tweaks to address the errors that are being introduced by conversion. 10 rivers have been identified as needing the mouths to be relocated, and 6 of those 10 are within dot controlled areas. So really we're only left with 4 where we are working with built up areas that might impact on the public or users of the river. So with stakeholder discussions, they agreed these 10 rivers needed relocation of their mouths so that the river mouths and or the seamay landward boundary would be at more sensible locations, so places where they've been more easily identified, at landmarks such as bridges or waterfalls. The other position identifier would be, for example, at the full extent of the tidal influence, that type of thing. We're not aware of any known adverse user impacts by changing the river locations. There are some users, such as white plate permit holders, that will move from one plan to another, but we've looked at the permit conditions and determined that there will be no impact on those holders of permits. There is a couple of properties on one of the rivers in Stewart Island that
possibly maybe undertaking permitted activities that we're not aware of. However, we think it's unlikely based on what we've been able to determine, but we will engage with those property holders to notify them and to clarify with them if you agree to this change going forward. So to summarise that, we're addressing errors in the current agreement. We're therefore addressing ambiguity where the coastal plan ends and the water and land plan starts. And we will be bringing the agreement up to date with the current mapping systems and therefore eliminating errors that introduces. Our next steps would be for everybody, all the key stakeholders to sign. Environment Southland will sign first, followed by SDC, ICC, and then finally IDOC as representatives for the Minister of Environment. While this agreement process is happening, the signing process is happening, we would be looking to develop a comms plan to engage with those identified people in the public that may be undertaking permitted activities, and to also advise people such as network utility operators, NZTA, and our internal catchment teams that would make the change. At the same time, once the agreement is signed, we would want to put the revised agreement up on the internet so that any new applicants that require permits under that would fall under this area would be hopefully more easily identified on what the changes are rather than relying on the old agreement which is contained in the current coastal plan. Any questions?
Eric.
Well, I think I indicated quite earlier on the question, Mr. Chair, and to some degree you answered that, which is really about the consequences and impacts and how they might be mitigated. So you kind of answered that. But, so how widely was the process consulted? Have we identified all the parties that are likely to be impacted? Or what happens if they come out of the woodwork a bit further down the track?
Yeah. We've looked at all the GIS maps in the vicinity of the 10 rivers. And as I say, 6 of those are in DOC. So those are in DOC. So the 4 rivers that are essentially affected or may have affected parties are reasonably built up areas, not very built up areas, but areas that we've got clear maps for. So we've had a good look through the GIS mapping. We've also been through the consents records. So we know who have consents. The only thing we don't know is permitted activities. And as I say, we've identified 2 landowners in Stewart Island that potentially may perhaps be discharging to the river. And then there's 1 lodge in Field who potentially may also be doing something similar. So we will be able to contact those 3 parties.
So you will contact them. And so, supplementary, Mr. Chairman, so the likes of, I think there's 4 whiteback stands on the sectors on the upper end. So will they become a prohibited activity after the change, or it will be a consent process for them to roll over?
Yes, so they will continue as they were. There will be no change to them whatsoever. The consents will stay in place. The only impact, if you call it that, will be that when they apply to renew consent, they'll be under the land and water plan instead of the coastal plan. And based on the wording of those 2 plans currently, they would be assessed in exactly the same manner.
Thank you.
Well, yes, I have an element in myself.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. 2 of those river mouths are very mobile. The Waio river mouth and the one at Tuku can come out at any point within in case of the Waio, it's over quite a lot of kilometres, and the Waimatuku river mouth is probably a kilometre and a half closer to Invercargill than maybe it was when the original point was put in. Just wondering if that has an influence, because those two rivers in particular are very variable, whether because of the changes you might need to look at those points, whether used, how that might impact on surrounding.
Through you, Jim. My understanding is that DOC has been involved with the determination of where the point should be and have those types of issues that can be taken into account when they decide where they should have settled on. It's more about making sure that we can, as easily as possible, identify where the mouth is and therefore where the CMA boundary is. So the shifting in reality won't have a huge impact on us, the state, in terms of what the purpose of the agreement is for.
Alan?
Just inquiry, thank you, whether there's ever been or a discussion as to a tangible identification of that point where it moves from the river to the coastal marine area. So I know pigs have difficulty if the river banks are eroded or even just the maintenance of pigs. But is it worth having any sort of sign or a peg that would indicate where one starts and one stops?
I see what you're saying. I think that part of this process has been to address the issues to make it more easily identifiable on the ground, and that's why a lot of these positions have been removed to places like bridges, because they are unlikely to change and are easily identifiable. As far as I know, there's been no discussion about pigs, and it's certainly not discussed in the RMA or through any of the legal advice that we received. I also suspect that the actual number of times that we need to be down to the centimetre or metre is probably minimal, potentially not really making it necessary.
Just looking at some of the rivers that are within the DOC estate, in some cases there has been a substantial movement. The Hollywood, I can't actually see where the existing star was, but I understand there is about 6 white-based sands now back at the mouth. How will they be affected? I'm assuming that the stakeholders were consulted with AGES, the territorial authorities, ourselves and DOC. I'm just worried there will be some impact on some of these, and the consultation will be after the fact. Have there been any conversations along those lines? I know while we're here, the way too, there's been a significant movement, and there has been conflict in the past as to where the coastal marine environment was. So has that been looked at at all?
So we have looked at the Hollyfoot in particular that you've mentioned, that the Hollyfoot River coordinates is one of the ones that we identified as having errors. So the actual mouth and the current plan for the Hollyfoot is way off in the bush somewhere. So at very best, people currently working in that area would have had to use the backup process of using the mean high water springs to calculate where the river mouth would be at that location. Nobody, to my knowledge, has raised that error with us. We weren't aware of it until we reviewed the agreement. So, to the best of my knowledge, nobody has actually looked at where the river mouth is on Hollyfoot. And also, I'm not aware of any permitted white-back sands on Hollyfoot. So,
There are the mouth, and they've always been in the CMA. The problem is now that the mouth is moved, so that the been quite in the right place, but that's a separate issue. Those white-based standards were always in the CMA, just based on the description of the original agreement, which was at there was a specific location, and even though the point wasn't accurately matched, the description means that they were always in the CMA, so that hasn't changed for them. And just to add to that, the two methods of determining the CMA are specified in the RMA. So it's, and you can't go outside that process. It's as indicated in the report, that's a kilometre up string of the mouth, or when a string is calculated by multiplying the width of the roof by 5. So that was done with the original agreement. There was just some errors that were put into the calculation, so that's what we're trying to fix. So yeah, especially for those like that stands, they're always in the CMA.
I just wanted to clarify.
That polling point is moved further inland, so that's extended the coastal area. And most of these are in that situation. It's just the Aparina white stands that are now moving into the water.
That's still our jurisdiction, not. Any further questions or comments on this item? If not,
I'll move it.
moved by Lyndall, seconded by Jeremy. All in favour say aye. Aye. Carried. Right, we will move to item 4, which is the vehicle system, page 101. Well, would you like to speak to us?
This item has been prepared largely for council direction on whether you wish to retain the first past the post electoral system for the next electoral round before change to the single transferable voting system. Council, under the Electoral Act, you also have the ability, if you wish, to undertake representation review and review of Maori Morton constituencies. But both of those matters were addressed in the last triennium. There was not a legal requirement to do it until the following triennium. So you don't have to address those, some of them. And just so you know, I have sent a copy of this report in draft form to you, so they were aware that it was coming forward, and they've acknowledged that they haven't provided any feedback or direction that they would like us to. So it is purely a political decision for council to make as to which system you wish to take, and once you have made a decision, we are required to publicly notify and also to let the public know that they may call
Peter,
Could I just say, Mr. Chairman, I think first past the post is a system that the community is very comfortable with, and understands really well, it's very clear. So the movement away from that, I think will take a great deal of discussion and thought, is my view. And just on another matter about iwi representation, could you, Mr. Chairman, give us, there is a standing offer, has been an offer on the table in the past. It's still open, is that correct?
That's different to the electoral system. There is actually an offer on the table for iwi to have represented on a couple of our committees. But that's actually outside. This is actually talking about having a separate iwi board. In the past, the conversations and the feedback we've had from iwi is they prefer to be able to use a range of people to speak to us. And I believe in this case we should be guided by iwi. If they were to make a representation, then we would have to look at that.
Just to indicate that there has been moves in that direction by the council.
Yes, we've had a very good relationship over the years with iwi. And,
Mr. Chairman, could I just ask on that point whether we know whether iwi still holds that view, because that view was expressed some time ago. That might pay us at this point to find out from them what their view now is, because there have been developments throughout the country since then.
I'm not sure if you heard Jan's introduction, where she has passed this item on to iwi, and at this stage have had no response apart from acknowledging the item.
Right, but perhaps we should wait for such a response, but thank you.
And of course, there is always the opportunity to publicly, for either the public or we to.
Yes, we can seek to have that put in place at any time. There's a time frame around which must be asked for if it's to be put in place for the next election, and they're fully aware of those rights and abilities to do that.
So today's decision will be publicly notified, and that for all parties to object if.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. There's a couple of points. One, I think it's been the experience of other councils that having a Maori representative can actually work against that, because everybody assumes that that person is speaking on behalf of everybody, and it perhaps reduces the external submissions that would come to the council, because everybody assumes that this is the voice of Maoridom. And it would also depend on whether it was an iwi representative or a Maori representative, because if it's an iwi ward, like if it's just Ngāi Tahu, then it's not a Maori one, because there's lots of Maori here who are not Ngāi Tahu, who would like to think that if we had a Maori ward, that they would have the opportunity to be represented on that. So it would just depend on the criteria for how you selected people who were eligible to stand for that constituency.
That's a good point, Lloyd. In the past, we've always voted for status quo and left the public, if they weren't happy for that, to participate. Any further comments or questions on this item?
Bonnie is waving to you.
Oh, sorry, Bonnie, I'm not looking at the screen. Bonnie, you're right.
Can you guys hear me all right?
Yep.
Cool. I just wanted to say that I'm really interested in the single transferable vote. I think it's a lot fairer for when we are representing a lot of people to these positions. And even like would be interested in seeing if the community had those thoughts as well. I know it's just passed, I think in Hamilton, and it would be worthwhile for us to look into whatever they did out there, I guess. Yeah.
And I support that view from you, Bonnie. STV needs to be looked at much more closely. We tend to wipe it away fairly quickly whenever it comes up in our council, and I don't think it's had a fair discussion wrapped around it yet. And so it's good to see a couple of other people on the council who also would like to see more work done on that question.
Thank you, Robert. Linda.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Following on from Councillor Mader's point about what's in the community, if we were to go down that track, I would be interested in the anticipated cost of the exercise.
That's a good point, and we have debated this before. You're both right, it's a technically very fair system, but unfortunately it's not well understood by the public. We see that with even the health board, which does use it. So in the past, we've basically gone with status quo, but if the public wanted to contest that, we would have to have that conversation. But as Peter said earlier, the first class of post is reasonably well understood. As soon as you start having to rank, people get quite confused. Any further comments before we go to a vote on the recommendations? I'm not seeing anything. Am I seeing anything else on the screen here? No.
Mr. Chairman, I think if you had 12 councillors in those wards, then the view may be slightly different. Because you've got wards, and in most wards there's only one or two, sometimes less and sometimes not. The biggest we get 1 board and 6 councillors. I think this is where we got sort of bogged down last time because we had this mix trying to represent as best we can the community. We ended up with first past the post as being what we thought was the best system. It's not saying our system can actually do the job, but people are been in that system doing other things and they start to technically vote strategically and they do all sorts of things. So that aside, I think the big question is, are we a ward system or are we not? And if we're a ward system, maybe our recommendation to the community is that we're a ward system and that's first past the post. If they want to change the ward system, then we need to look at whether there is better voting type out there that we could actually address that. So I'm just wondering whether we put in there that we put out a recommendation into the community and the community can come back and tell us whether they agree with their recommendation, which is very close to post of what I give around the table with some, there are some who would actually like to consider options.
Thank you for that, Lloyd. Any further comments? And I think the reward system is a good point where you only need the health boards to vote for a number, and if you often want the highest number of initial votes don't necessarily get in it, is people don't think it particularly well. But so we have recommendations 1, 2.
Within recommendation 2, you are required to provide a direction into whether it's option 1, option 4, option 3.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, I didn't really ask a question, so I'm wondering, we can't really choose 1, 2 or 3 until, for me anyway, I would need an idea of the cost of that poll of electors. So is anybody able to give us a vague figure about?
Not something I have any knowledge of. We have never undertaken a poll of electors in the past.
I wouldn't hesitate. We could probably text Neil and see if he has any idea.
Or just, I guess it's a consultation process, isn't it? So what's your
Consultation and then a large communication project too.
Yeah,
To educate people if there was any changes as some.
Yeah, so it's going to be quite costly.
It would be quite costly.
Thank you.
Chairman, look, I'm not aware of any disenchantment being expressed in any of the forums anywhere I've been in. I know we all think that single transferable vote is a good system, and I would have preferred to have seen it in a national arena, but it didn't happen. It is quite complex to understand, but because there has been no disenchantment expressed to me anywhere, nor any stated publicly that I'm aware of, I just think we need to make a decision, and there can be provisions where people can have a petition, do something, energise change, if there's a mood for change, but I'm not aware there is a mood for change.
No, that's a good point, Eric. We've got that much change coming at us at the moment. That my view is really claiming first past the post, but the option is there. If it was a groundswell of support, the option is still there for the public to come to us rather than us trying to oppose or putting the cost on the public at the time and finances those there.
Mr. Chairman, do we have a responsibility as a council to help the public to become aware of the potentials? Because Councillor Roy is quite correct. You don't hear a lot of talk of this in the public arena, but that's largely because they're unaware that the potential exists. It certainly isn't commonly expressed by us. It always just seems to be tucked away at this point in the, in the cycle. Talked about in-house, never really. I'm just wondering, are we obliged to make a decent effort to alert the public to the different forms of voting?
Council is obliged to make a public notice. That's all its obligation. If it chooses to do more than that, that's up to council to do.
So did you hear that, Robert? That the council was obliged to make a public notice, and I've got no problem with us putting it up on Facebook. It's not a cost.
Well, yes, I did hear that. I accept that, but I also know that the council goes out of its way sometimes to advise different communities about issues that affect them beyond the letter of the law. It seems like we're taking the simplest and laziest way out of this particular issue. How to vote most fairly is surely in a democracy the most important issue.
Maybe, Mr. Chairman, we could, like you say, put it up on the Facebook page and see if we get a public reaction. What Councillor Roy suggested that there isn't, but test those waters and see what comes of that.
The moment you put it up, you energise activity. And would that energising be fair? Who's going to explain what it means? All of that stuff. I'd sooner react to a move and change and test the meeting, Mr. Chair. I'm happy to move recommendation 1, recommendation 2, the small one, and recommendation 3.
We have a mover and a seconder. Any further debate on the recommendation? If not, I will put the recommendation. All in favour will say aye. Raise their hand. Interest. All those against say no.
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 So you have 2 noes to record. The ayes have it. Thank you for your participation. We will now move to item 5.
Item 5 is the councillor's meeting schedule, and the only change that I published to include our Waituna Liaison Committee session here at council on Friday at 1 o'clock, and to change the council workshop strategy development meeting schedule for the 7th and 8th of September to the 28th and 29th of September.
Do you have any other meetings or meetings they have attended to add at this stage?
I seek leave for a fortnight. I'm not sure whether I'm going to do it or not. Now, COVID's coming up. I'm on a road to Friday for a fortnight. This coming Friday.
Friday for a fortnight. Any other requests for leave? Seeing any? No meetings that people have attended that aren't on the list? Lyndall.
Just a question around the meetings. Now that webinars are much more the thing, I'm able to attend more of those kinds of things. So do you want them listed in this space as well, or is that?
That can be helpful, but it's not. You're not claiming a meeting expense or travel. It's not a problem that they're not there.
Okay.
I think that's good because it probably also alerts other people that the webinars on, and like some of them was a cost, but we've got a number of people who are interested in actually lower the cost. So that's I've got Lloyd and Jeremy.
Mr. Chairman, I did a discussion with Jimmy, and there's a number of meetings that come through that aren't actually captured onto the council diary. I use it extensively, but I know because of it has been notified through the GM that I've missed meetings. It wasn't intention to do that because I rely on one specific diary to format my time. So I just want to urge staff that they have meetings, make sure it comes through the GM because she knows their timetable more than anybody else. So and yesterday, for instance, we had you at Bluff and Tiana basically at the same time. While we coped with it, that was not necessarily the intention. We actually need to have people around in the room who we can. So I just want to put a plug to start through this meeting that it's really appreciated the team to be involved. Even if they're just holding dates or whatever, it makes a big difference to what's coming up and we can plan here. Otherwise, we're going to just challenge.
Jeremy.
I was just going to indicate that obviously that Matera meeting for itself. We'll get 2 meetings for Matera liaison.
This meeting we're quite lucky at.
Yeah, probably. It's real.
Still got the worst.
We get to come out right away, so.
No further advances on the meeting schedule?
Yeah, just like to say, Jen, well organised with the diary, it's very important. If you can get that stuff up here as quickly as you know those changes, which you are doing, really much appreciated. Like Lloyd said, everything is moved around the schedule for me, probably like all others here. No surprises.
Hopefully. Somebody like to move the recommendation. Moved by Dave, second by Jeremy. All in favour, say aye.
Aye.
Take us to item 6, which is the common seal. Just the delegations to authority, etc. Pretty straightforward. Moved by Jeremy, seconded by Ellen. And for the discussion, I'll put motion. All in favour will say aye.
Aye.
That will. No extraordinary business. That will complete the open session for today. And we move that we go to public exclusion. Moved by Eric, seconded by Jeremy. All in favour will say aye.
Aye.
Reasons. With the reasons.
Yep.
The reasons,
To prevent the disclosure or use of official information for improper gain or advantage, and to allow council to carry out commercial activities without prejudice or disadvantage.
thanks for something you sort of hidden away there.
Mhm.